Glitch Tex, Castle Crawl. It's a crime that this one isn't more well known. Quite simply, Glitch Tex is the best show that you have never seen. Miko and Five are tasked with fighting glitches that manifest in the real world, turning the show into an action science fiction, and this episode into a major Castlevania homage. It's one of the few shows about video games that really understands them. It gets everything from the dialogue to the level design, to even the background music. There is so much genuine passion here, and that's helped by centering on Miko, who is just excited about everything. She is one of my absolute favorite protagonists. And the action. This is some of the best cinematography that you will ever see in a cartoon, period. I was expecting to like this one. I was not expecting it to go toe-to-toe with some of the best shows of all time. If there's one show on this list that you have to see, it has to be Glitch Tex. This episode, and all of them. The Simpsons, 22 short films about Springfield, also known as the Steamed Hams episode.
Good Lord, what is happening in there? Aurora Borealis?
Meme aside, this is the perfect episode if you wanted to start getting into The Simpsons, if you have no idea where to begin. It's composed of a bunch of shorter segments all stuck together with a fast-paced flow. This allows it to give a showcase to almost every major character, from Homer to Lisa to Bart, and from there it gives several side characters a moment to shine. And if someone there clicks with you, you could look up all of their major appearances and start going from there. And before long, you might find yourself a full-time Simpsons fan. It's a really funny watch all throughout.
I'm behind 3 inches of bulletproof glass. Do your worst. No, stay out of there! Stay out of there! Oh, good God, no!
Avatar: The Last Airbender, Tales of Ba Sing Se. If you're on the fence about watching through Avatar: The Last Airbender, I'd recommend giving this one episode a sneak peek. The show as a whole does tell one continuous story, and that can be intimidating for people who prefer a more casual viewing experience. However, this episode, despite its acclaim, actually doesn't have too much plot relevance. This is an episode in which the plot takes a break and gives looser, more personal stories to several main characters. Not to mention, it has some moments that show you the power of an Avatar emotional gut punch.
It is usually best to admit mistakes when they occur, and to seek to restore honor.
When I'm through with you kids, the window won't be the only thing that's broken!
But not this time. Run!
South Park, Scott Tenorman Must Die. The most famous adult cartoon of all time is still probably South Park, even though its popularity has waned in recent years. But still, every animation fan should at least check it out. But I will admit that getting into South Park is definitely a challenge. Some of the older episodes are very of their time with an outdated perspective, such as the first Man Bear Pig episode, and there are some episodes that are just gross for the sake of it. But the episodes that do hold up are still hilarious, and raunchy in all of the right ways. Scott Tenorman Must Die is a perfect South Park episode. If you want to know what South Park is all about, this is the one you have to see. It's not about any issues or satire. It's about some fast-paced Looney Tunes gags and pissing Cartman off. The titular Scott Tenorman tricks Cartman into buying his p***s, and then Cartman tries to get his money back. And from there, it gets more and more deranged until the episode goes completely insane. Also, it has Radiohead, which alone means this episode is worth checking out. Chowder, Shopping Spree. I'm still surprised with how much Chowder exploded in recent years. I always liked it, but I never expected it to become one of the most loved cartoons of the 21st century. But upon checking it out again recently, I could say, yeah, I can see it. This is the kind of show that really gels with the kind of stuff that people are into now. There is a lot of meta humor and a lot of fourth wall breaks in the show. The episode that I recommended is the famous funny meme episode,
No money means no animation!
And while that moment is certainly the crowning jewel of the episode as a whole is a good introduction of what you're getting into if you decide to watch Chowder. And you should watch Chowder. The show's great. Smiling Friends, Gwimbly. After a decade where animation tried to explore some fairly depressing depths, a show about a charity just trying to make people happy does end up seeming quite subversive. I don't know if this is a direct response to a lot of current trends, but a lot of people have found Smiling Friends super refreshing for that reason specifically. It's also just a really funny show all around, and it can definitely get really weird. In this episode, the Smiling Friends come across a PS1 mascot and try to make him happy by revitalizing his career, which just leads them to the strangest places. But I think we can all agree that there's one thing that absolutely needs to be said about this episode. Fucking make the real Spyro 4 already. You made the Crash 4, make the Spyro 4! Animaniacs, Hooked on a Ceiling. Animaniacs is the greatest cartoon comedy of all time. Honestly, it might be one of the greatest things that Steven Spielberg has ever done, and that's not an exaggeration. Animaniacs is that good. If you haven't seen the Warner zany blend of vaudeville, slapstick, and satire firsthand, you're not doing this being an animation fan thing correctly. Sorry to be harsh, but it's true. And I am not talking about the 2020 version. This is a discussion for another day, but as for now, please do not place these two shows in the same universe. Hooked on a Ceiling puts the Warner trio into a situation they perform the best in, driving historical characters insane. This episode has them face off against Michelangelo, as he tries to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and just that setup alone leaves so much room for comedy. This episode is known as one of their best, and it absolutely should not be missed.
More naked people! I wouldn't go flashing that around if I were you, Mike. This is a church.
Samurai Jack, Samurai vs. Ninja. Samurai Jack to this day is one of my favorite cartoons of all time. I've spoken on many of its episodes in the past, but if you really want to know what the show is all about, give Samurai vs. Ninja a look. In this episode, Jack must deal with a shinobi, a warrior of darkness. A simple setup becomes a feast for the eyes in the second act, when light and dark come into play. We have a fight scene where the combatants are just going back and forth, disappearing into the light and the darkness. It is one of the most unique action scenes that you will see in any cartoon. Adventure Time: The Limit. As one of the most influential shows of all time, every fan of animation should at least give Adventure Time a chance. However, with over 240 episodes and wild swings in direction, that could be a big ask, especially as it's not the most beginner-friendly cartoon out there. Season 1 weirdness and all that. However, if you do want to know what you're getting into, Season 2's The Limit is Adventure Time when it's on point. We're following Finn and Jake as they're delving into a silly quest fraught with real danger for a ridiculous prize. Despite that, it's more straight-laced than a lot of other episodes. An introductory level weirdness, if you will. It's also a great showcase of the dynamics of our two main characters. If you do like this episode, it's safe to say that Adventure Time is the right show for you. Bluey, Sleepytime. It's very rare for a preschool show to take off like Bluey has. Right now, it's one of the biggest cartoons in the entire world, but it doesn't take a lot of watching to see why. If you personally have any apprehension about watching something aimed at very young children, I'd recommend giving the episode Sleepytime a chance. It doesn't have a moral like many Bluey episodes do, it doesn't even really have a story, and it is only 7 minutes long. Literally, the episode is about exploring the dreamscapes of Bluey's little sister, Bingo. This allows it to showcase beautiful animation, and it has to be seen to be believed. Metaphorically, the episode is about exploring the deep bond and the love between the family of the healers, and how they'll always be there for each other. It's an episode that's a perfect showcase of how warm and cozy Bluey can be, and as soon as you watch it, it'll be no wonder that it took off like it did. Gravity Falls, Tourist Trapped. And now for the most obvious choice on this list, especially since it's in the news again for the first time in like 7 years. If you haven't seen the series about the Pines twins spending their summer vacation in a town where weirdness thrives, what are you doing with your life really? Oh, you're curing cancer. That's nice and everything, but you're telling me that you haven't seen Gravity Falls? Tourist Trapped is the very first episode of the show, and I'd recommend it as a sampler if you're on the garden wall about getting into a series with heavy continuity and a lot of ongoing stories. The first episode is relatively self-contained, while being a good amalgamation of what you can expect from a typical Gravity Falls episode. But seriously, it's Gravity Falls, one of the most loved shows of all time, no matter what WatchMojo says. No, I am never forgetting that. How does something like that even happen? Family Guy, Road to the North Pole. This show has both diehard defenders and diehard haters. Most people know me as the latter, but even I have to admit that this show does have some gems that stand the test of time, even in its later years. The Season 9 Christmas special, Road to the North Pole, is so good I often forget that Family Guy had a Christmas special before this one, because this is the Family Guy Christmas special to me. The Road 2 subseries has a great reputation, and for good reason. When the show gives the spotlight to Brian and Stewie, like these episodes do, they tend to get the best material on the entire show. These two have a way of playing off each other that I can't even describe. When it's just the two of them, they almost never miss a beat. Road to the North Pole is much darker than your typical Christmas fare, but it feels very comfortable in the world of Family Guy. Seeing Santa's factory overworked and broken down is genuinely moving, and the ending of the episode is shockingly sweet from Family Guy. But let's be honest, the best part of the episode is absolutely the song.
But now instead all we're feeling is dread because Christmas time is killing us.
If you're nervous about revisiting Family Guy, give Christmas Time is Killing Us a listen, and then watch the episode it came from. Jimmy Neutron, Jimmy for President. If you'd ask me what the most popular non-SpongeBob Nicktoon of all time is, I'd have to say Jimmy Neutron. I don't know where this came from, but people these days are really into Jimmy Neutron. Not that I can't see the reasons why. It's got a lot of great characters. Hugh especially, he has some of the best lines in the show.
Once when I was 7 years old, I sat on a banana, and of course, that changed my life.
Carl is constantly funny. Sheen is just a riot. And there are so many interesting and unique scenarios thanks to Jimmy's gadgets. Now that I go on and on, I'm seeing it more and more how this show got popular over the years. And the episode where Jimmy, Sheen, and Cindy all try to become class president, I think is a great introduction if you're wondering where the hype is coming from yourself. In this episode, all of the characters are wonderfully on display, letting you know how everyone ticks. And this is also the episode that introduces Baldy, who is still just one hell of a meme. Kim Possible Crush. One of the greatest modern Disney cartoons has to be Kim Possible. A lot of shows have the wake up, go to school, save the world formula, but this is the show that perfected it. It stars teenage girl Kim Possible as she's forced to live a double life, a typical high school cheerleader and a worldwide trailblazer. The show has a ton of action and adventure, and it's just a lot of fun all the way through. Crush is the very first episode, and I think it's a great first episode. It perfectly encapsulates who these characters are and what kind of show that you're getting into. SpongeBob, Planet of the Jellyfish. Squarepants is one of those few shows that has managed to transcend generations, like Looney Tunes or Scooby-Doo, but SpongeBob's fandom is so much stronger than any of them at present, and that's because there's a ton of fantastic episodes to choose from. If you're remotely familiar with the show, you've heard about Band Geeks, Chocolate with Nuts, or Pizza Delivery. Maybe even the more modern gems like Karen's Virus or Mimic Madness. SpongeBob did wane in quality after the first movie and before the second one, creating a smattering of quite bad episodes that I've personally made a career talking about, and that's probably scared people away from the middle seasons. Yet, even as someone who talks about these again and again, I've always been insistent that there are some good episodes there, which is why I wanted to point out Planet of the Jellyfish. SpongeBob usually doesn't focus on tone and atmosphere, but when it does, it really manages to pull through. A lot of Season 8 went into these science fiction plots, and the greatest of all was this homage to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's engaging, it's funny, and it shouldn't be ignored just because it's from one of the middle seasons. Phineas and Ferb, Summer Belongs to You. One of the most fondly remembered shows of the 2000s is Phineas and Ferb, and if you haven't seen it, my god are you missing out. Just about every single episode of the show is on point. No matter which one you're watching, you're bound to have a good time. And the best showcase of everything that makes the show work all together is the special Summer Belongs to You. It has all of the character dynamics. Through this you can learn how everyone sees each other, how everything about the show works, all without having any previous context about what happened in previous episodes. The episode has quite a tension as it goes along, as it's a race around the world, and it's capped off with one of the best songs of the entire show. This episode is simply a treat. Gargoyles and Justice for All. Did you guys know that this was a Disney show? Because it's really easy to forget that in the midst of all these gunfights and heavy action. Disney cartoon. Gargoyles is just great. It's deep and introspective, and it fits right in there with shows like Batman Animated or Teen Titans. This episode is where that really stands out, as the Gargoyles leader Goliath is accused of stealing from a jewelry store, and so he's put on trial. But being a gargoyle, the citizens of the city are ready to condemn him no matter what the verdict is. Goliath, on the other hand, wants to win this trial fairly without any legal tricks, believing that gargoyles will never be trusted if they don't play by the humans' rules. It's a surprisingly thoughtful episode as it examines just what justice is and how it can be hard to get a fair trial. Welcome to Demon School, Iruma-Kun. I'm not the most up-to-date on anime, but there's one I checked out on a whim. It was about a boy who had this cartoonishly terrible life. Like, the series starts with his parents selling him to a demon. It sounds like it's going to be the most dark and miserable thing ever, but it actually ended up being the funniest thing that I have ever seen. I complained about quote-unquote torture porns here a lot. However, Demon School is kind of like the opposite of one of those. The main character, Iruma, just wants to blend in because he's afraid that he'll be eaten if he doesn't. But through bizarre circumstances, he not only becomes the most popular kid at school, and he also gets a range of friends. Good things just keep happening to this kid, no matter how much he does not want them. And that little twist, I find so fresh and new and engaging. Seriously, just watch the first episode. I guarantee you'll get hooked if that sounds appealing to you at all. Villainous, Satellite Secrets. How the hell did the show only last for 6 episodes? Villainous is about an evil mastermind named Black Hat trying to spread evil and villainy around the world with the help of his henchmen. It's just a goddamn hilarious show. Dementia is something else and probably one of my favorite characters of all time. Villainous started as a web series, but Cartoon Network did pick it up prior for a very short time. 7 if you want to count a random crossover with Victor and Valentino of all things. There are more episodes of the web series. Just watch it all. Seriously, you will not regret it if you like something on the weird and wild side. Eddsworld, Hammer and Fail. Ed Gold and Eddsworld as a whole had so much influence on independent animation. Even today, you could still find people with Eddsworld-style avatars, or an art style that was obviously inspired by him. All this from a series about 4, later 3 guys just hanging around the house and doing whatever. It's well known that Ed's favorite episode was WT Future, but I really think that Ed's humor was fully solidified with Hammer and Fail, especially the first part. It's basically Looney Tunes type gags about the boys building an extension to their house, but it goes a little bit further, gets a little bit more demented. And then for part 2, it goes in a direction that could only happen in the wonderful world of Ed. I'm seriously not going to spoil it for you, it's amazing. The Weekenders. Prue, can I just take this moment to say that The Weekenders is awesome? I've actually been a fan of this one since I was a little kid, even though I probably never mentioned it on this channel before. It's, not exactly the kind of thing that you'd expect to get so incredibly popular in some circles, as the show is literally just about 4 kids trying to make the most of their weekend. But no, the people who love The Weekenders really love The Weekenders. It's got its fun little facts and moments that just stick in your brain, like the pizza parlor that picks a new theme in every single episode. The show also has this style of humor. In this episode, the gang is learning about what being popular is like, and in this world, popular kids actually do get a bunch of secret benefits. But what sticks out to me most about the show is that Tino has like the best mom in the history of animation. I've complained about animation parents a lot, but this is beyond a breath of fresh air. Tino's mom always knows just what to say, and she has just the best attitude, and I needed to pick an episode that just showcased the kind of advice that she has, and this is a good example of that. Tom and Jerry, Cat Concerto. You gotta have respect for the classics, and it doesn't get much more classic than Tom and Jerry. You know, people actually used to get dressed up and go to the theaters to see these. A new Tom and Jerry short was like an event once upon a time, and now we can get that experience at home. This episode is famous for its controversy. Both Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry both released a short around the same time as their characters faced off against a mouse and a piano. Plagiarism complaints abound, but it was likely a case of parallel thinking. Either way, I think that it fits Tom and Jerry way better. Where else is Bugs Bunny facing off against a mouse? Nowhere. It's not really a Bugs thing. This concept is right at home with the cat and mouse duo. Over the Garden Wall, Into the Unknown. This was a 10-episode miniseries that got everyone talking back in 2014. It's strange, grim, and just a little bit creepy. People go crazy for the show, even today, and you really shouldn't be left out on that. And to those who are crazy about the show, know that I've actually recommended the 9th episode in this series that has heavy continuity. To spoil as little as I can, Episode 9 happens chronologically first, and from my own personal perspective, I find the viewing experience a lot smoother if you start with that episode and then watch all of the other episodes in chronological order. I'll go deeper into why during the show's full review during See and Reel, but as for now, you just gotta trust me on this. Kaeloo, Let's Play House. Not Caillou, Kaeloo. This is a French cartoon that is perfect if you're craving something batshit insane. It is the most out there cartoon that I've ever seen. Take Digital Circus and go 5 steps beyond that. It stars this frog thing who has godlike powers and forces the other characters on the show into deranged children's games. In Let's Play House, Kaeloo plays the mom, forces the male duck to be the daughter, the squirrel to be the son, who is forced to study against his will, and Mr. Cat must play the father, who,
Well then, it's after the divorce, because they're clearly not mine.
The episode gets darker than this, by the way. Be warned, this might look like a kid's show, but it is strictly for adults. If you have a pressure point, Kaeloo will hit it. I swear, it can get as demented as South Park. Know what you're getting into for this one. Class of 3000, The Devil Lil D. Class of 3000 is probably the best celebrity cartoon of all time. It's got a unique style and a fun sense of humor. And not to mention, most of the music in the show is great. It's also a little bit educational, as Andre 3000's self-insert character, Sonny Bridges, is a teacher dedicated to passing on a passion about music. This is most apparent when the devil comes down to Georgia and we see how bad a recording contract actually can be. Just with a cartoonish twist. Lil D hams it up all the way throughout the episode and is just the best character. This one had a hard time finding an audience when it first came out, and budgetary issues meant the network buried it, but in recent years it has been getting a major cult following, and I love to see it. I always thought Class of 3000 was a great show. Its humor is unlike any other, and we absolutely cannot forget that music.
But all we want is your soul. Give it to me.
Invader Zim, Bad Rubber Piggy. Sometimes you just want to see something really fucked up, and there's no better show for that than Invader Zim. Who would have thought that a show about an incompetent alien trying to conquer Earth could get so out there? But Invader Zim doesn't know what the word limit means. Dark Harvest gets everyone talking as the most disturbing cartoon episode of all time, where Zim is stealing other kids' organs and replacing them with random objects. But Bad Rubber Piggy is the one that stuck in my mind the most, where Zim invents a time portal and starts sending toy pigs back in time to screw up his rival Dib's life. The episode gets super dark. Really dark.
Come on, kid. If I lose one more patient today, I'm gonna get written up!
Scarringly dark, but in a way that I kinda love. This is one Zim episode that I don't think I'm ever gonna forget. And if you've ever seen it before, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Friendship is Magic, the main attraction. There are stories upon stories of the effect that bronies have had on the internet and specific individuals. Most bronies are decent people, but you can't deny the bad eggs that have done some very bad things. Of course, that's led to a lot of backlash towards the show in question, even though the cartoon itself is very innocuous. From where we are in the 2020s, it's hard to imagine how this of all shows got so out of hand so quickly, because the first season especially is like really low-key and kind of boring in hindsight. That being said, a lot of people cringe really hard and groan when the show itself is brought up, and that I don't understand either. The fandom, I get completely. But the show, with episodes like Main Attraction, I still can't help but find love for it. In this episode, we learn that Applejack, the country pony, actually used to be friends with Lady Gaga Pony. And this is surprising to everyone, Applejack included. In all seriousness, this is one of the episodes that really speaks to me on a personal level. And even as I fell out of the fandom, this is one episode I keep coming back to. Literally, the episode is about someone you know taking a very strange road in their life and turning out to be completely different. But in earnest, it's about being true to yourself, but at the same time, broadcasting that to an audience and being what an audience wants. If you're into acting or performing or even doing YouTube, this episode is something that you have to see, because it really does hit close to home. Trying to be true to yourself and to an audience at the same time is a tightrope that I've rarely seen media explore the threading of the needle as well as this one does. Mau Mau, Heroes of Pure Heart, Adora-Dad. This show is another one that flew under the radar. Mau Mau is a cat who is trying to become a legendary hero and through circumstances becomes the sheriff of a place called Pure Heart Valley. It's a place that sounds sweet and cute, but is constantly under attack by monsters. He is joined by a cyborg badger named Badgerclops, and a bat called Adora-Bat. The heart of the show is its connections between the characters. While there's plenty of action-adventure, its heartfelt and cuter moments are where the cartoon really does shine. And a particularly stellar example is that of this episode, where Adora-Bat's father comes into the picture and realizes that she's been risking her life fighting monsters, and acts appropriately. It's a cute, charming little story, and I can't wait to talk about the show more during CN Reel next year. Kid vs. Cat, Flea Brain. This one's another classic. You probably heard the name around, because it has some really passionate fans. It stars a kid named Coop. He has a little sister named Millie, who one day brings a stray cat home. This cat happens to be an alien bent on world domination, and Coop is the only one who knows it. These lead them to having a very Looney Tunes style rivalry. I asked around what some of the best episodes of the show are, and Flea Brain came up a lot. It's the episode where Cat creates a bunch of robotic fleas that can control the minds of others. And it is a fantastic watch. I'd recommend it to just about anyone. Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go, Thingy. You probably heard this one around before. This is one I've been trying to get into for a while, but it was always on the backlog. I checked it out for this video, and it's a pretty damn good cartoon. In the far-off future, we follow a boy named Shiro, as he comes across a robot filled with monkeys that he brings out of cryostasis. Together, they fight to save their city from the evil Skeleton King. I don't know if Thingy is particularly loved among the diehard fans, and believe me, this show has some super diehard fans, but I thought it was a really good introduction episode with a lot of tension, and a lot of little character moments. It actually has a pretty damn good mystery. The show recently had its 20-year anniversary, so if there's ever a time to check out the Monkey Robot Show, it's now. Adventures of Sam and Max, A Glitch in Time. This was a show that was super ahead of its time, and as such, it's become a bit of a meme on the internet a couple years ago. Sam & Max is a show that was made for the fans of the adventure game series first and foremost.
By the way, Sam, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I may have accidentally chewed through our brake lines. I guess we'll just have to slow down by violently rear-ending other motorists.
Which means that they're totally insane. Take something like Animaniacs or Ren and Stimpy, and just keep pushing the zaniness. Sam is this totally wild rabbit thing, and he's partnered with a bear named Max, who seems to be the only one who really understands the insanity around him. And yet he can't seem to see how insane it really is, so he treats it all as normal. Then you throw time travel into the mix, and you know you're never going to see anything quite like this ever again. Batman the Animated Series? Almost got him. Recently I gave a review to the latest Batman cartoon, Caped Crusader. That one has become surprisingly divisive. A lot of people really like it, and a lot of people really don't. I'm more in the latter camp, unfortunately, but I think that we can all get along in the end, just as long as we all agree that the 90s animated series was probably the best that the Caped Crusader has been in animation. Maybe there's no accounting for taste, but this is the one for me. And if you're into superheroes at all, especially Batman, you owe yourself to check out this show and really the entire DCAU of the late 90s and early 2000s. Almost Got Him is a good sampler of what you're getting into, as it's about a poker game between Batman's rogue gallery, as they each tell a tale of how they almost got the Batman. Flapjack? That's a wrap. While never reaching the popularity that Chowder has, Flapjack is still a massive cult classic around the internet. The people who care about the show really care about it. And if you're into something on the more weird, gross, and offbeat side of things, you'll probably enjoy it too. It's about a wannabe pirate, Captain Knuckles, and the boy who follows him around, Flapjack, in their search for Candied Island, or barring that, any scrap of sweets that they can find. This particular episode is a good example of what you can expect from the show overall, as the candy store owner challenges the duo to find as many wrappers as they can in exchange for sweets. It's a perfect examination of dynamics between them, and it's got a lot of good gags. Hey Arnold! Oscar can't read. I can't give enough praise to Hey Arnold. You wouldn't think a show about just a boy living in the city with his friends would be so engaging, but there's a heart and a style that very few shows even try to capture. It's one of the few television children's cartoons that really try to push animation in terms of a storytelling medium, where we just go into these deep character studies or analysis pieces. While you've heard of Pigeon Man or Helg on the Couch, I think that the Oscar episodes are underrated in this regard. Oscar is a loser. He's unemployed, mooches off of his wife, and in this episode, we learn that he can't even read. And yet, for some reason, when this guy is given the starring role, I can't help but feel something for him, and this is my favorite of all of those episodes. Ed, Edd n Eddy, one of those Eds. This show is fairly easy to misjudge. I've heard a lot of people assume that it's loaded with gross out, something like a more modern Ren and Stimpy, or that the show is just very mean and all of the characters were unlikable. And in less talented hands, Ed, Edd n Eddy could certainly have been that show. But with the hands of Danny Antonucci and his team, he created something that was just, well, funny. One of those Eds, I think, is the perfect introduction to the show. A quarter is stuck to the ground, and all the cul-de-sac kids want at it. And from there, it's a competition of who has the best method of pulling it off the curb. It's one of the episodes that lets just about every member of the cast have a moment to shine. And honestly, it's a great introduction to the show. It's not about the scam or the money, it's about the fumbles trying to get it. And we got some great ones in this episode. Fairly Odd Parents, A New Wish, Fearless. Right now, the Fairly Odd Parents revival is lighting the internet on fire. And for good reason. This is the best the show has been in over a decade, with its beautiful animation, super likable characters, and a course correction steering away from the baggage that's been holding Fop back. Fearless is my favorite episode of the entire show, at least before Perry returned, and it became more continuity driven. It has a wonderful concept as one of Hazel's friend's fears comes to life, and she's tasked with stopping it. The episode is just a really good showcase of their friendship, all while having a great sense of humor, while being just a little bit creepy. If you're worried about checking out yet another Fairly Odd Parents show, give at least this one episode a chance. I guarantee you won't regret it. American Dad, the American Dad After School Special. I have to give credit to an American Dad episode as the best thing that is a part of any Seth MacFarlane show. This is one that I don't even want to go too deeply into because it has a genuinely good twist. Seriously, I was floored. It's especially shocking since it happened so early in the show's run, Season 2. As the title implies, it's about a very serious issue, delving into Stan's weight. But the surprising thing about the episode is that it tackles the issue beautifully. I still remember the very first time that I watched this episode over a decade ago, which is rare for even my favorite episodes of my favorite shows. Seriously, if you do go into this episode, go into it as unspoiled as possible. It is something else. Dan vs. George Washington. One thing that does irk me about Friendship is Magic is that it overshadowed Dan Vs. When Discovery Kids were branded to the hub, there were two cartoons on it that hit any kind of mainstream attention. Friendship is Magic, which you've heard of if you haven't seen, and Dan Vs. It was slightly underground at the time, but it was a cult classic, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it in years. Which is a shame, because Dan Vs. really resonates with the sadistic part of the human brain that just wants to destroy the system. The show is about something crapping on Dan's life, and him getting the most elaborate revenge possible. And it gets totally ridiculous. A good example of that is this episode. When a cherry tree falls down on Dan's car, he tries to get revenge on the long-dead president, because he believes that George Washington is the one who destroyed his car. And in this show, it's not out of the realm of possibility that George Washington did that. Cartoon Network's Mad, Flammable. This was a cartoon that aired on CN back in the early 2010s based on the magazine. It basically went all in on pop culture parodies. The first episode had sketches about Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber, Bambi, Transformers. People didn't talk too much about it when it came out, but it really seems to have gotten a resurgence over the years. Probably because it does vibe with general internet humor. I can imagine so many of these different sketches being on Smosh or whatever. The particular sketch that I'm recommending, Flammable, is a parody of the Katy Perry song Firework, and it ends with Katy getting arrested. That's all you have to know. I'm probably going to give the show a full look at some point, so we'll talk more about it then. My Life as a Teenage Robot, Daydream Believer. One of the best cartoonists of our generation has to be Rob Renzetti. He has his hands on so many other classic productions. Dexter's Lab, Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, Friendship is Magic, Gravity Falls. But his best work has to have been on his own production. My Life as a Teenage Robot. Take a retro futuristic art style and give it to a story about a robot girl trying to blend in at high school, all while fighting off monsters and aliens. And you just got a winning premise. My Life as a Teenage Robot is still one of my favorite shows of the 2000s. The double life genre is quite crowded, but I think it is so because it really works, especially since they're very on point with the robot aspect here. In this episode, Jenny is upset that she can't dream, and so she asks her mother if she can get them. And when she gets these dreams, Jenny becomes kind of an LSD addict. Honestly, I'm just a sucker for the Dr. Seuss references in this episode. The style is perfectly on point. Courage the Cowardly Dog, Robot Randy. Courage is a show that I've praised many times and will continue to do so in the future. What appears to be a simple horror cartoon about a dog saving its owners from spooky monsters goes on to be so much more. There's a heart in the show that so many other cartoons don't even dare to approach, and there's a weirdness that's solely unique to it. All of Courage's best qualities come together in one of its most underrated episodes, Robot Randy. It's about this Christopher Walken giant robot trying to take over the Earth. And yet, it's also about trying to be true to yourself, going against society's expectations for you. Because that's what Courage the Cowardly Dog is. It's so unique to the show that episodes like this need to be seen if you're any kind of fan of animation. Constant Pain. I reviewed this pilot a billion years ago, but I still think it holds up. Taking after comic books, we follow the adventures of Amanda and her scientist father, Dr. Payne, in a futuristic steampunk-type world. They come from a long line of protectors, defending humanity from all kinds of existential threats. The animation? Flawless. The character relationships? Great. The only bad thing about it is that it's unlikely that we'll ever get a full series of Constant Pain, especially after 20 years. For reasons that I go deeper into in the actual review. Something Towers. It really is a shame because this could have been one of the Nickelodeon greats. But even as just like an 11-minute short film, I still really like this and I check it out every now and again. And if you've never seen it before, you should check it out. Lilo and Stitch? Spooky. It's interesting that most of the direct-to-DVD Disney sequels were so bad because the cartoons based on the original movies were actually pretty decent. Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Hercules, they were all good watches in their own right. But I have to give it to Lilo and Stitch as the best cartoon based on a Disney movie. It was a part of the collect-em-all trend inspired by shows like Pokemon. Die-hard Stitch fans know that he was Experiment 626, and the show is about gathering the other 625 superpowered alien monsters bent on destruction and finding a place for them to fit into human society. In the Halloween episode, they come across a shapeshifter that can morph into anyone's deepest, darkest fear. It's a great special, giving fun moments and deep introspection to each of the show's cast of characters. The Amazing World of Gumball, The Remote. What seems to be your typical animated sitcom on the surface proves to be something deeper the more you look into it. Gumball has so much hidden lore and development that it would take over 200 episodes to cover it all, and getting into it can seem intimidating, especially since the first season is admittedly not all that great, which is why I'd recommend getting into Gumball at the start of the second season, with The Remote. This is the first episode of the series that was really on point, and it gives each of the Watersons something to do, showcasing how each member of the family interacts and how they relate to one another. Not to mention, it's just hilarious. Looney Tunes. One Froggy Evening. I'm not entirely sure what to say about this. It's Looney Tunes. Even if you're not into animation at all, and this is the very first time you stumbled upon a cartoon community video and you did it by complete accident, you know what the Looney Tunes is. Everyone on Earth knows what the Looney Tunes is. And the one that stuck in my brain the most wasn't a Daffy or a Bugs or even a Porky short. No, it's the one about the singing frog, and I'm not entirely sure why. But there must be something particularly special about this one. See it, and you tell me why it's a masterpiece. Please. I've seen it like 20 times in a row, so it must be doing something right. Futurama, Game of Tones. Futurama is the best adult cartoon of all time, bar none, at least in its original run. It did have a recent revival, and as a longtime fan, I found it disappointing. And personally, I'd hate it if that's what the show was to new viewers. The original run had these deep character studies, such as the Why of Fry, or Luck of the Fryrish, that kept hitting you in the feels over and over again, and are some of the best television that I've ever seen, far flung from the sci-fi Simpsons that many people might have assumed it would have been from the outset. Picking just one episode was Other Robots, but I had to go with something a little bit under the radar, Game of Tones. The premise of the show overall starts as a joke, but as the show goes on, we get more and more detail on exactly what that means and how it affects Fry as a person. And it really does affect Fry more than he cares to admit. Game of Tones gives Fry an opportunity to revisit his last day in 1999, the last day that he had with his family and what his life was before he was cryogenically frozen for 1,000 years. Even if you've never seen Futurama and don't really have a lot of context for this character, you still feel every beat he goes through. The plot resolution is a little bit silly, but that's to be expected of a Matt Groening show. But the ending is gonna stick with you forever. The Modifiers. Agent Zero and her sidekick Mole attempt to thwart the evil efforts of Baron Vane in this very gothic-style world. This was another pilot that Nickelodeon refused, which is a crying shame because it's just so likable. It's a fun little superhero magical girl type thing in a world that you don't often see that kind of stuff. I did talk about this pilot as a part of a video a long time ago, but since it was only one segment in that video, everyone believes I didn't actually talk about this, so I'll probably be tempted to give the thing its own full video at some point, because the story behind the modifiers is just so tragic, and it is highly unlikely that we'll ever get a full series of this. Watch it sometimes to see what we all missed out on. Danny Phantom, fanning the flames. While Fairly OddParents was certainly the most popular of Butch Hartman's cartoons, most people would say that the best is Danny Phantom. It used a comic book style to tell the story of a boy who stepped into a strange machine, which gave him ghost powers, which he uses to fight against the ghosts that came into the real world. Ghosts with some very dark backstories. One of the fan favorites was Ember McLean. No relation. Possible relation. Danny faces off against the ghosts of a high school girl in her debut episode, who gets more and more powerful the more attention she gets. The music in the episode is great, and actually does allude to Ember's backstory just in a TVG-rated kind of way. The story and the action are just phenomenal. Puff the Magic Dragon, the first short. If there's something to define my early childhood, it has to be Puff. I'm not exactly talking about the Peter, Paul, and Mary song. I'm talking about the short films that were based on the character from the song. There were 3 of them that were made at the tail end of the 70s, and I've been wanting to talk about these for years. If there's something that can get me to break down into raw nostalgia, it's these. Especially the first of 3 episodes, which is kind of sort of a direct adaptation of the song. However, shockingly for the time, the film actually tackles things like social anxiety and mental illness, with a lot of respect and a lot of gentleness. But beyond its fantastic writing and its great animation for the time, what sticks with me most is Puff's voice. Burgess Meredith gives it such a grandfatherly quality that I can't even really describe in a video like this.
Now, as I promised, you helped yourself. In doing so, you helped me. And now it's time to be truly brave.
Any of the 3 shorts makes me feel like a kid again, and this was the tape that I watched obsessively on loop when I was very young. Teen Titans, Troc. I don't think the show needs too much of an introduction. 5 superpower teenagers fighting crime that somehow turned into an emotional roller coaster. Starfire was always my favorite character on Teen Titans. Her upbeat, bubbly personality just made it so much easier to get into a superhero show, which I usually wasn't fond of in general, and it helped that she had the best, most emotionally intense episodes of the entire show. If it's not How Long Is Forever, it's Metamorphosis. If it's not that, it's Troc. This episode is famous, or infamous, because it's the racism episode of the show, and it was made in the mid-2000s, and a lot of shows did try to tackle something like this, and not a lot of them succeeded. And there is definitely some mid-2000s thing here due to the censorship of the time.
You know what it feels like to be judged simply because of how you look?
Of course I do. I'm part robot.
But ignoring those, I do think that this is one of the best takes on this particular issue, at least on a mainstream cartoon aimed at kids. Troc is just really, really poignant. Teen Titans Go! Video game references. Teen Titans Go! Walked away from the hard-hitting storytelling and the deep drama of the 2000s version, and decided to just be funny, which got it a lot of criticism. I criticized the show a lot for that, but I do think it's time to bury the hatchet. I haven't totally turned around on Teen Titans Go, it's never gonna be my thing, and I still do hate most of the episodes that are reviewed back in the day, but I think most everyone in the community is in agreement. This show was overhated back in its day. It'd be one thing if it tried to be funny and never succeeded, but it did succeed sometimes, in episodes like video game references. I mean, I don't know what to say about it, since it's exactly what it says on the tin. The episode is full of unapologetic retro video game references, and I love that. Even besides the humor, I just love the accuracy. The entire episode is a love letter to all manner of classic games, and if you're a retro gamer at all, this episode is just gonna hit a special place. If you want to give Teen Titans Go a proper chance and not just go off the word of decade-old super harsh internet opinions, this is the one that I suggest to be your entry point. Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Little Rock of Horrors. This has got to be the most memorable episode ever. Cartoon Network back in the day had some special cross-series collaborations. Sometimes every show would have to deal with aliens, or in this case, every show would have a musical episode. And the best of them is Little Rock of Horrors. It's one long song from beginning to end. And this is what introduced me to Voltaire, which alone gives it a recommendation. Seriously, this guy has an amazing talent, and he was brought onto Billy and Mandy several times after this. This episode could have just been a typical alien invasion plot, but with a fun musical number, it becomes something truly special. Check it out sometime this October, and then listen to Voltaire stuff afterwards. He's super eclectic, so he's probably done at least one song in your genre. The Loud House, really loud music. There really is no show more tragic than The Loud House. It was such a breath of fresh air when it came out. It was popular. Nickelodeon was actually treating it with respect, even though, against all odds, it actually didn't star a yellow sponge. Then, the creator turned out to be a scumbag. Then the fandom got really out of hand. And then the show got bad. And then Nickelodeon gave it the true SpongeBob treatment. Movies, more and more episodes, overexposure to hell and back, crash this thing to the ground, make it go on forever while it goes down in flames. The Nickelodeon way. I still like the Loud House. The good stuff about the show hasn't changed, and I still think that really loud music is a fantastic piece of animation, where Luna is forced to decide between being famous or being true to herself. It's really an introspective special, and not to mention, it has some really good music. If you've been staying away from the Loud House, I can certainly understand. But if you want to remember the good times, this episode is a great place to reminisce. Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld. A young girl is trying to design a video game but keeps getting stuck at a particular crash. Suddenly she's warped into the game and she must save the land within as their warrior princess. She embarks on a short adventure full of action, good humor, and video game references. Such is the premise of one of DC's most underrated superheroes. Kind of. When watching this, you're going to be hit with the bafflement that the powers that be haven't given this like 5 seasons and a movie, because it's exploding with potential. With a great character and top-notch animation, you'd expect to be seeing Amethyst in something other than Teen Titans Go cameos. But unfortunately, outside of her comic books, all we have is about 9 minutes of animation. Maybe if enough of us check this one out, Amethyst will get a proper show eventually, because it's an injustice that she doesn't already have one. Aquaman had a cartoon, I don't know why Amethyst can't. Sonic Boom, the Meteor. Sonic cartoons are a bit hit and miss, aren't they? People really like Sat AM, and I hear that Adventures does have its fan base, but then you got things like Underground. However, most would say that Sonic Boom is the best of all of the Sonic cartoons. And how could it not be? It blends clever writing with awesome humor, and it really brings out the fun side of Sonic the Hedgehog. The Meteor is their body swap episode. Sonic and Eggman switch bodies. That is literally all you gotta know. It's a fun time. We have fun here. Powerpuff Girls Speed Demon. You'd expect that a cartoon about 3 little kindergarten girls fighting crime would be sweet and innocent. Sugar, spice, and everything nice. That's what the Powerpuff Girls uses to lure you into a false sense of security. It's actually the darkest of the original cartoons. Even more so than Courage the Cowardly Dog, as the girls were forced to contend with very, very dark monsters. The most sinister being the literal devil. And not an October goes by without me checking out Speed Demon. This is probably the darkest thing that's ever been on CN outside of Adult Swim. Ever wonder what would happen if a superhero disappeared for 50 years? Hell on Earth is the answer. This is an episode that has a casualty count. You know, for kids. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Seeing Red. One thing that I've noticed is that people seem to have turned on Foster's Home. Back in the day, it was like the one good thing on CN. But nowadays, it seems that a lot of people say that they just can't stand it. A lot of that is on cheese, which I totally get. But a lot of people seem to just hate it in general, which I don't understand at all. I mean, a lot of people do point to Blue as just this asshole character, and he is an asshole. He's selfish and conceited and always trying to pull a fast one. But you know, Bender, Rick Sanchez, there's precedent. And the world does punish Blue quite a lot, even when he doesn't deserve it sometimes. But I do think that Blue being an asshole is balanced out with some warmer portrayals of the character, like this episode, Seeing Red. In this episode, Mac's bully brother Terrence creates an imaginary friend to try and destroy Blue. His name is Red, and Blue is entirely in his rights to mess with this guy. I don't know, I just find this episode funny, but this one is probably better reserved for its own full review. Which is going to be fun talking about it next year, I can say that much. Star vs. Muberty.
Wait a second, Marco's a boy.
Star vs. is kind of like animation's Game of Thrones. There's a quote for you. But what I mean is that it was really, really loved, because it was great and it did a lot of cool and interesting things. Then the ending happened, and apparently Star vs. sucked all along. Apparently I gotta be the guy to say, no, it didn't actually suck. The first couple of seasons were actually pretty damn good, and still are pretty damn good. I'm never gonna forget about the episode where Star goes through her version of puberty. This type of episode isn't completely rare. Lloyd in Space and Teen Titans did this concept, but I think this is the most memorable version of this particular story, and it really has to be seen. Steven Universe, Mindful Education. I hate what happened to the show. Unfortunately, it's a classic story by now. Something was really loved, then overexposure happened, then a fan base got out of hand, and then the show became a football in a stupid political internet debate. I just want to state, while the show definitely has its problems, I think Steven Universe is an enduring classic. The show about a boy and space rocks fighting against an evil armada has the power to touch the heart and soul, and Mindful Education is my favorite example of this. As someone who's made those little mistakes that just stick in your brain that you can't seem to get out of your head, it speaks to me on a very deep level. And if you've ever been in a place like that, I'd point you directly to this episode. Johnny Test, The Enchanted Land of Johnny.
Whoa, didn't see that coming.
Once upon a time, Johnny Test was considered the worst thing around. It's hard to articulate just how much it was despised, especially because, well, today, it's not that bad. It was overexposed, sure, but there were actually plenty of episodes that I did like, giving this one an honest revisit. And I think The Enchanted Land of Johnny stands out as a particular gem. During a rainy day, Johnny and Dookie are bored, so they wander into a portal made by the super genius Mary and Susan Test. This leads them into a fantasy world that they are tasked with saving from a twin monster. The twist of the episode is really easy to see, but it's a genuinely fun adventure. And now that the anti-hype has died down, if you want to give Johnny Test an objective take, I'd advise starting here. In its earlier days, Johnny Test could actually get really interesting, and I think it's time we all realize that. Recess, the story of Womps. Kids Next Door is said to be about kids building their own culture and their own society, when I think that premise is much more apt to Recess. That's what this show is about, with the kids coming up with their own rules and their own code of the playground. A lot of times it's to circumvent the adults, but a lot of the time it's just because they're kids, just beginning to understand the world and how society in general works. The show is also really great at showing how childish adult societies can really be. In this episode, the kids are tired of getting into trouble due to dirty words. So they come up with a new word that they can use to avoid getting in trouble, womps, in place of something like sucks. This is probably my favorite example of a swearing episode, because within this episode, the adults, being adults, think that this pseudo-swear is a bad word, and the argument just keeps escalating and escalating to strange new heights. If you made it this far in, I'm assuming that you really do like what you're watching. If I could ask one favor, it's to check out my Patreon. Making stuff like this takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and YouTube only pays so much. In all honesty, during the production of this video, I got into some financial difficulties, and I'll be going more into detail on that during a live stream in the coming days. I'll keep you updated on that one. But until then, every little bit really does help at the moment. Dexter's Laboratory, Star Trek Unconventional. When I was a young kid, this episode confused the hell out of me. I was the kind of guy who thought that Vulcan was a volcano on Mars. But as an adult, I'm more of a Next Generation kind of guy. But I can really appreciate Dexter's take on the original Star Trek series, and this entire episode is just one long send-up to it. When Dexter and his friends that don't exist in any other episode try to go to a Star Trek convention, they get rerouted and end up in a Barbie convention. But they treat it exactly like a Star Trek mission. This was the real Barbenheimer. If you know anything about Dexter's Lab, you know that the writers were super goddamn nerdy. When they were doing an episode about Speed Racer, or Dungeons & Dragons, or Star Trek, they nailed it beautifully. These are some of the best cultural references that you will ever see. Now, if you're not up on Star Trek, the jokes in this one might be lost on you, but if you are, this episode is one of the funniest things that you will ever see as long as you live. Rick and Morty, the Ricks must be crazy. A lot of people are sour on the show these days. It has waxed and waned in quality recently, and there is the fandom. I'm definitely not going to defend any Szechuan shenanigans, but I don't want people to forget how good the first couple of seasons were, and why the show was so groundbreaking and loved back in 2014. An adult cartoon that took itself seriously and explored deeper philosophies was a rarity at the time. Not so much now, but you can't deny that Rick and Morty did have its influence on the animation landscape, and in many ways for the better. Not to mention, it took its comedic writing just as seriously as it took its philosophical writing. Everything good about Rick and Morty comes together in The Ricks Must Be Crazy. It explores the purpose of meaning. Rick created an entire universe, and they only exist to power his car. It explores character dynamics, as Rick is essentially forced to contend with a version of himself. They can go toe-to-toe. And not to mention, the Keep Summer Safe subplot is just funny as hell. Ren and Stimpy, Space Madness. It's hard to believe that this show ruled the world once upon a time, as the alleged heinous actions of its creator have overshadowed everything that Ren and Stimpy was, as well as that terrible adult party revival. However, it is important to remember that Ren and Stimpy was not a one-man endeavor, and a team worked really hard to make this show something special, and their work should be appreciated. A lot of people assume that Ren and Stimpy is this evil, gross, demented nonsense, and it is. But it's clever, evil, gross, demented nonsense. Episodes like Space Madness is a study in insanity, and just how far animation can push a character. It's an amazing, hilarious, and strangely beautiful episode. And if it wasn't something that I think everyone could get something out of, I wouldn't be recommending it here. Static Shock, Jimmy. Just a warning, this might be the most intense episode on the list, but this episode is a masterpiece. It is technically speaking a very special episode about guns and gun violence, but unlike other shows that I've seen tackle this issue, it tackles it really well and really respectfully. This episode goes deep into the emotional impact of a gun-related tragedy. This isn't the most typical episode of Static Shock, which is why I was hesitant to recommend it for a list like this. While the show could get deep and intense, there's not much superhero fare in this episode. You know, the actual fighting and battles are quite subdued. But if there is one Static Shock episode that anyone should see, it has to be Jimmy, because this episode really understands tension. It knows how to make the audience uncomfortable in all of the correct ways. Tiny Toon Adventures. One beer. One of the best Looney Tunes spin-offs had to be Tiny Toons. It probably fell into the shadow of Animaniacs for the most part, but I really do think that it had a lot of great qualities of its own, because Animaniacs never had an episode quite like this one.
Juice, milk, soda, or a cold one?
So in this episode, our characters, who are children, decide to start drinking beer, and then they drive behind the wheel, and then they drive off a cliff and die. This sounds like some creepypasta episode that your pot-addicted friend would make up to screw with you, but I swear to God, this is a real episode that really did exist. It did get banned, but like, people made it, and it aired, and it's just something that you really need to take in. You know, stare at it for a while.
I hope the kids got the message. Yeah, drinking's uncool.
The Scooby-Doo Project. The Cartoon Network bumpers were something really special, weren't they? I must have watched so many of these kids. CN City, I think, is what's remembered the most fondly these days. But even before then, there was this charm and creativity to them, having properties both old and new interact.
You are here today, Scrappy?
You are a genius! How'd you figure that out?
Cartoon Network, the best place for cartoons.
Not for me! Not for me, man!
It really formed the network's identity back in the day, and there was just so much effort put into these things that happened in between the shows. The Scooby-Doo Project was probably the best thing that they ever did. This is a found footage parody of the Blair Witch Project, which was quite common at the time this came out, but the fact that this was an on-point parody done with Scooby-Doo characters makes it stand out something special. Do yourself a favor and add this to your Halloween watching list this October, and you will not be disappointed. Just find a file with them all together, because there is continuity between these bumpers, believe it or not. Codename Kids Next Door, Operation Report. This was the last of the classic cartoons, and it was a great one to go out on. It took the war of kids versus adults to entirely new heights, and it was really innovative for its time. This was one of the first Western cartoons to have major status quo changes, as old allies turned into new enemies, or even vice versa. It gets kinda ridiculous in hindsight when you watch all of the episodes in succession, but it is something that definitely would appeal to a kid. However, one of the most memorable things about the show is what they did once a season, where they'd have just these completely different style showcases. It could be a send-up to the Animatrix, or it could just be a completely silent episode about Sector V trying to get rid of a fly. Or, in this case, we have a Rashomon episode, complete with all 5 of the characters telling what happened with their assignment in completely different art styles. This also has the benefit of letting you know what characters you'll be dealing with and what they're like, and that you're in for a good time. Rugrats, What the Big People Do. If you think that Spongebob is oversaturated now, I can't begin to describe how Rugrats was in the 90s. Toys, video games, theatrical movies, it was inescapable. The band Blackstreet did a theme song for the Rugrats movie. I don't know who they are either, but they must have been big because they made the theme song for the Rugrats movie. It's probably ironic that that's probably the reason that nobody talks about it these days. When something is talked to death like the Rugrats were, people get tired of talking about it. Then they stop. Rugrats did have a remake a couple of years ago, but it failed to find an audience, because the original Rugrats was lightning in a bottle that I don't think you can replicate today. It had a kind of logic to it that most television writers don't have today. The episode What the Big People Do is something you could only get out of 90s Rugrats. The show is from the perspective of babies and their imagination, and in this episode, we see their interpretation of adult life and going to work. Everything from paper pushers to traffic tickets. And when you think about it, this episode is an adult's interpretation of a baby's interpretation of what it's like to be an adult in the 90s. This is the kind of nonsense that explains why millennials are the way they are, by the way. Jackie Chan Adventures Origami. This is one show that I'm surprised that people don't bring up so much these days. It came out at a time when there were a ton of martial arts cartoons, to be sure, but I think this one was ahead of most of the flock. We follow Jackie Chan, a real archaeologist, as he's forced to travel around the world after magical artifacts, all while his family members tag along, whether he wants them to or not. It's a series that mixes all of the adventure of an Indiana Jones film with the stunts and the action of a Jackie Chan martial arts film, and the flow and the creativity within them is just amazing. Throw in a good dash of humor, and you have a gem that stands the test of time. The show is largely serialized, however the tail end of the second season gave us some standalone episodes, and my favorite out of all of them was the one where Jackie had to face off against a thief who had the ability to fold up like paper. Dave the Barbarian, Right a Pillage. Dave the Barbarian is a show that I'm surprised hasn't become one of those mega cult classics. Something like Chowder or Jimmy Neutron. You know, once the internet rediscovers a decade after it airs and just goes crazy for, because Dave the Barbarian fits right in with those shows. It's loaded with quick gags, meta humor, and just sheer absurdity. I watched this all the time as a kid, and it's one of those that very few people have heard of whenever I bring it up. Maybe it's just my circle, but my circle is technically the cartoon community, so I can be very confident in saying this one is very underrated. My favorite episode is probably Right a Pillage, where Dave must prove himself a proper barbarian, or else he'll force shame upon his entire family. And if you know anything about Dave, which is a big if, I guess, you know that's a tall order, because he's not a proper barbarian at all. The Wild Thornberrys, Forget Me Not. I can't think of too many shows like The Wild Thornberrys. It's about this young girl named Eliza who travels around the world with the ability to speak to animals. This allows the show to be very educational about animals and their behavior and habitats, without it being a strictly educational show. Although these days, it's mostly known for how much a meme Nigel Thornberry is.
But I'm afraid I've lost the sight in my eye.
Move your hand, Nigel.
However, this show is much more than just moments of... It really has the power to hit you in the heart, with episodes like Forget Me Not. In this one, Eliza and her family try to find and reconnect with an elephant that Nigel saved from poachers 20 years ago. And the episode, it goes places. I'm not gonna spoil it here, you gotta see it to believe it. Regular show, high score. Regular show is simply impossible to describe, at least in a brief blurb. The tagline, "It's anything but," is wildly accurate to how unhinged this show can get out of nowhere, as mundane tasks explode into strange adventures. If you want to know what this show is really about, you need to watch an episode so good it got Cartoon Network sued. It's about Mordecai and Rigby fighting for the high score against expert gamer Jack Farley, a floating head who is legally distinct from renowned hot sauce salesman Billy Mitchell. And at risk of getting sued myself by Nintendo, I think I'll end this segment here. Life with Loopy, Egghead. If you Gen Z viewers wanted to know exactly what the 90s was like, all you have to do is watch a little-known variety show called Kablam. Its tone and style was exactly what millennials were into when we were kids. Weird, wacky, nonsensical, and just a little bit gross. And the star of the show had to be the Life with Loopy shorts. These were about an insane girl who did things like lived on the ceiling, or lassoed the moon into her backyard, or became a werewolf, or in this particular episode's example, ate a bunch of eggs until she turned into an egg and had to run away from a giant chicken who wanted to hatch her. It sounds insane, but we turned out fine in the end, I think. Rocko's Modern Life, Rocko's Happy Sack. I don't know how well I'm hitting you guys with a lot of my 20th century suggestions. I do think that these older shows look great, but in recommending them, I can't help but feel like my parents clinging to Jabberjaw or whatever. I really do believe that everyone should see the classics, but I get it. This stuff is from a different era, and it might not seem as interesting to you as it does to me. However, if there's one classic that I think you all got to see, it's Rocko's Modern Life. This is a show that feels more and more relevant the further we get from its airing. It's a show about being on your own for the first time, and that's always going to be resonant. You know, that awkward part in your early 20s where you're trying to figure out how things work, which usually involves a lot of trial and error, a lot of painful trial and error. Even though these are things you've seen your parents do 1,000 times before, you still feel intimidated by doing it on your own. This episode is grocery shopping on a budget, and dealing with every little inconvenience that gets in the way. But beyond that, this episode is really, really funny, and a good representation of Rocko's humor overall.
Sea mammals. Who needs them? This country would be a whole lot better without them.
Hey, buddy, my wife's a sea mammal.
All building up to just a wonderful climax. You've got to see it. Domo TV, Headphones. These shorts came out of nowhere. They aired on Nickelodeon in the mid-2000s, starring the mascot of a Japanese company that became really popular in the US around the time, Domo-kun. And for something that didn't have much of a concept, the shorts ended up being surprisingly charming. Despite being a large brownie monster thing, Domo experiences the world as a small kid, misunderstanding things that leads to a lot of funny moments. My favorite of these shorts is Headphones, in which he uses a pair to listen to the sounds of nature, and everything from the stream to a tomato. It's really chill. I don't know if these shorts get a lot of love, but they really should. They hold up wonderfully. Wish Fart, a ragtag team. Yes, I'm serious. Please don't click off the video. Wish-For-Art is an incredibly easy show to misjudge. Its title is stupid, and the episode titles don't help either. And the animation is ugly. I'm not even going to defend the art style, but the show itself is so far from what you'd expect. It's actually a show about 3 friends trying to live a typical life in a world filled with all kinds of fantastical creatures and dealing with magical mishaps. Wish-For-Art is charming, as you'd expect a show about a leprechaun to be. I really think that people would get into Wish-For-Art if they gave it a chance. And a good episode to check out is We're a Ragtag Team, where the group wishes to pull off a heist, and then they realize they've accidentally stolen family treasure. Now they must make a reverse heist without getting caught to bring it back. I could go on and on trying to defend my choice here, but you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. It's one of my favorite shows of the 2010s, and longtime viewers of mine know that I'm not too into the kind of show that this one looks like. I could go on about the animation style, but that discussion is probably reserved for another video. It's a big topic. It's Pony Annie-versary. This show is a tragedy and it bums me out. It's a sweet and charming Nicktoon about a girl and her pony living in an apartment. But because it wasn't SpongeBob, it was never given a real chance on the network. And that's a crying shame, because there is so much heart and passion in this one, for something that has such a simple premise. In this episode, it appears to be a special day for Pony, but Annie can't remember what occasion it seems to be. It's a common premise for an episode to be sure, but the characters' little quirks make it a fun romp.
Aw, no, it's broken. Property of the Parks Department. Another clue!
Seriously though, if there's a show that Nick killed quick, check it out, because it's bound to be leagues better than anything they actually do care about. Its Pony deserved better, just like almost all of the shows that Nick cut short. Elliot from Earth? Inadvertent inversion. You want to know the worst part about being a fan of animation is? Learning just how many wonderful shows were abused or cut short or never really given a chance. Elliot from Earth is one of those. It's about a boy and his mother activating an alien technology that whooshes them away to a space station on the other end of the universe, and they must live there and fit in. I guess I shouldn't be surprised this one didn't last too long, since it is quite similar to another show that didn't last very long, Lloyd in Space. But while that one was surprisingly poignant and deep and ahead of its time, this one is just chill and charming. I can't really describe it as anything other than comfortable. And I know that very few shows like this are going to get hugely popular, but if calm and comfortable is your thing, this show can really be your thing. Most episodes are about the family trying to fit in, this one included, and it makes for a fun little show. At least it's fun enough to last for more than a month, you know? Rupert. Rupert in Timeland. On the surface, Rupert seems to be a typical kids cartoon designed to teach morality tales. A stone's throw away from Little Bear. It was based on a comic strip that was all about friendship and adventure. Then you watch the show, and you learn that it has a very interesting way of teaching things. A lot of cartoons have that don't be in a rush to grow up moral, but only Rupert teaches this lesson by having the main characters stop time because they ate peppered pickles in a tent, and then they meet Father Time. And that's not even the strange part of the episode, by the way. This isn't even the strange episode of the show. Honestly, I can't even describe it. Why wasn't I watching this show when I was a kid instead of Mike, Lou, and Og? Out of the Past, The Life and Times of Juniper Lee. What happens to the show is a tragedy. It took a while to find its footing, and it faded into the shadows of more popular martial arts cartoons of the time. A show about a magical protector with a double life rang as an American Dragon clone. And as the network began burying it in response, the show itself rose rapidly in quality. The second half of Juniper Lee is filled with great humor, deep emotional resonance, and wonderful action. This all comes to a head in the episode Out of the Past, where Juniper Lee is forced to contend with an ancient protector who went bad due to the pressures of the role. And what follows is some of the best action and intrigue that you will ever see in a Western cartoon. King of the Hill, the Peggy Horror Picture Show. This is a show that scares people off for a different reason than, say, South Park or Family Guy. A lot of people expect it to be really boring and straight-laced and not very fun. On the other hand, they also expect it to be very, very conservative, as in the Redneck's Choice cartoon. And while I can't deny that it can be conservative in some of its messaging, it can actually get surprisingly liberal in the most surprising of places. And if you don't believe me, check out the episode Peggy Horror Picture Show. The title is a reference to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is an important movie for the LGBT. And this was intentional, because in this episode, Redneck Peggy Hill meets a drag queen, and honestly, this is one of the most respectful portrayals of a drag queen and drag culture in all of animation, especially for the time that it came out. To say that this one is ahead of its time would be an understatement. Cat Scratch Core-Uption. When I went through all the Nicktoons back in 2019, Cat Scratch was my biggest positive surprise. This show flew completely under the radar when it aired, and you wouldn't think that it was anything special. It's about 3 cats who inherit a mansion and a fortune after their owner passes away, a turn on a very strange cliche. but when you watch it, the show is just the right kind of bonkers. The episode Core-Uption, for example, has their human friend Kimberly fail an assignment because she thinks that the core of the Earth is filled with butterflies and rainbows. Because this makes her sad, one of the cats, Gordon, takes her project and throws it into the core of the Earth, making Kimberly's belief very, very accurate. Every episode of the show is like this, by the way, and it's a shame that it's not appreciated more than it is. As told by Ginger, and then she was gone. This is probably the most different of all of the Nicktoons. It didn't have these wild adventures, creepy monsters, or elaborate fantasy sequences. It had a girl and her diary going through the trials and misadventures of a junior high school. I guess it does sound similar to Doug, but As Told by Ginger actually took a step beyond. It's darker, and it goes with stories closer to reality. And the most famous one is probably the episode where Ginger writes a very sad poem, and so the staff of the school believes that she has depression. This is an episode that really speaks to me personally, because this was one of my exact fears when I was a kid, where my teachers would think that I was writing something disturbed, and so I didn't show anyone anything and failed more classes than I should have. God, the Devil, and Bob. Bob's father. I gave this episode a review way back when, and I still think the episode holds up. I'd recommend watching the review after this, because this is an episode that's hard to talk about in a truncated segment in a large video like this. The show is about God and the devil having a little competition. Someone of the devil's choosing has to prove that humanity is worth saving, and the devil picks Bob, just a typical no-name guy from Detroit. The show as a whole is actually really funny and really poignant, and it's one of my favorite adult cartoons of all time. It never got off the ground because I guess religious people got offended by it, which has always been strange to me, because it's very respectful of the religion, more so than South Park, Family Guy, or even The Simpsons at times. Maybe it was just because the network thought that religious people would get offended. This episode is one of my favorites of all time. Bob's father is about said character dying after a miserable life, and Bob tries to talk to him in the afterlife, first believing that he's in hell, but later learning that he made it somewhere else. It's a very deep episode all around, and even if you're not religious, it is very much worth a watch. Lloyd in Space, the hero of Urbit-Knarr. I checked out the show on a whim last year. I remember watching it as a kid, and it being okay. And that's what everyone else seemed to think too. I wasn't expecting it to be one of my favorite cartoons of the 2000s. It is shockingly good. It's about an alien boy who lives on a space station with his single mother and psychic little sister. Maybe this is just a premise that really gels with me. Maybe it's the technobabble that kept other people away. But I saw something special here. The show seemed ahead of its time in the most batshit insane ways.
Hi, wanna dance? Half girl, half zebra? What the heck?
There's one episode where an android gains sentience. It constantly has humor like this.
Is it hers?
No, it ain't hers. It's mine. Sheesh. Last time I go skinny dipping in that pool.
Good galaxies, man. Put some clothes on.
This is a Disney cartoon, by the way. There's just not another show like it. And picking one episode to recommend was so difficult. How about the episode where this happens?
Your heartfelt plea for mercy touches me greatly. It convinces me that destroying a ship full of helpless children is going to be even more enjoyable than I had imagined.
Lloyd's mother, Nora Nebulon, is just one of the best parents in all of animation. She's stern and super serious, but there's actually a really human and understanding side to her. And I think this episode is a great showcase of that, while also showing what kind of world Lloyd in Space takes place in. I don't know when the hell this show became a masterpiece, but I really do hope that the Mandela effect works like this a lot more often. Oh Yeah Cartoons, Fathead. Oh Yeah Cartoons was Nickelodeon's pilot showcase series, and it had a wide variety of great and interesting concepts that were all fighting to become a real show. Some, like Teenage Robot or Fairly Odd Parents, made it, but there was a lot of gold left on the cutting room floor. Fathead is about a cave kid trying to steal a T-Rex egg as a rite of passage. And can I ask why we don't have more cartoons that take place in the prehistoric era? That, you know, aren't attached to the Flintstones? Dinosaurs are cool, and in the realm of a cartoon, it sounds like an interesting area to explore. Actually, I know it's interesting because the pilot made it interesting. All of the characters in this are just super memorable, and the whole thing is just so incredibly fun. Freakazoid Hero Boy. It's strange that, even with how beloved Animaniacs has, the other cartoons made by the same team haven't had at least some level of popularity. Pinky and the Brain definitely get some love, but when you bring up something like Hysteria or Freakazoid, you tend to get blank stares. Which is a shame because they're pretty much universally masterpieces. And there's nothing more ahead of its time than Freakazoid. He has super strength, speed, and agility, and access to all of the internet's knowledge, which means that his show is incredibly meta. The episode I picked up is basically just 22 minutes of this at play. I mean, it starts with an Astro Boy homage. It's just a lot of laughs. Freakazoid is one of the finest cartoon comedies of all time, and it's a shame that it's not more well loved. Victor and Valentino, Legend of the Hidden Skate Park. This is a show that I just happened to fall in love with. It was written off as a Gravity Falls clone, as it's about two siblings going away for the summer where they contend with monsters and mysteries. But beyond that, the shows really are quite different. Victor and Valentino is a show that understands brotherhood and the rivalries that two boys can have growing up better than any other show that I've ever seen. But I think the episode that I have to recommend is Legend of the Hidden Skate Park, because this is just one huge homage to Hook and Bangarang, as the two brothers stumble into a lost civilization where the kids make all of the rules. And no, I'm not looking too deep into things. They literally got Dante Bosco to guest star as the leader. Justice League. A Better World. Batman the Animated Series gets a lot of praise, which it should, but as a kid I really got more into a different show in the DCAU, Justice League. It had Batman, but it also had Superman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman. I love these characters, and I loved how it took on one particularly daring story. Evil Superman is an idea that's been done a lot, and it rarely ever does work. This is a time where it works. In this two-parter, Lex Luthor has managed to become President of the United States, and he screws up so badly that Superman kills him. And that's just how the episode starts. It is one of the most ambitious stories that I've ever seen in a superhero cartoon. The DCAU is better than the Marvel Universe, by the way. I'm not saying that with any hint of irony. Goof Troop. A Nightmare on Goof Street. If you're watching Goof Troop, you're watching it for Pete and his family. Just look at the expressions on this guy. He's this scheming con man of a neighbor that you love to see be brought down a peg. And you get to do that in this episode quite a lot. He steals a prize from Goofy over a phone quiz, and he immediately comes to regret it. The gags in this episode keep coming, and they don't stop coming. They said that they were going to remodel his house, and let's just say, they remodel his house. Goof Troop is this perfect blend of sitcom with over-the-top cartoon antics, and I wish it got the kind of love that DuckTales or Chip and Dale did. OKKO, Crossover Nexus. This is a show that's easy to misjudge. It seems like it's going to be one of those constantly loud and fast-paced and not very well thought out shows, but when you give it a chance, not only do you see that it has a heart, you see that this is like the ultimate geek show, and I mean that in the best way possible. This show is in love with all things geek culture, from old school video games to trading cards, to yes, even obscure animation. This is the kind of show that says, let's do environmentalism by literally bringing Captain Planet back. The one episode that must be seen to be believed is Crossover Nexus, which had the insane idea of just bringing back almost every show that Cartoon Network has ever seen, in a fight against the evil of cancellation. For most shows, this would be a big, epic event, but this is the kind of stuff that OKKO did like episode per episode. Ozzy and Drix, A Cold Day in Hector. I checked out this one mostly due to nostalgia. I remembered watching it a lot as a kid, but honestly, it's not all that bad. Based on the mediocre movie where Chris Rock is a white blood cell fighting off a virus in Bill Murray's body, the spin-off cartoon has the same premise, but it's like way better. For one, it's rarely as ever gross as the movie, but two, it keeps the tension the movie had with a wide variety of different scenarios. Ozzy and Drix get transplanted into the body of the 13-year-old Hector, who is the most unlucky kid to ever exist. The kid nearly has his appendix rupture, almost gets hit by a car due to insomnia, one virus wants to create fucking cancer, and in this episode, he nearly freezes to death. It's like a show about Eugene from Hey Arnold, and I love it. Sticking Around. If it ain't fixed, break it. This show is an interesting one. Sticking Around has a very unique concept for a show. It was meant to look like a kid actually made it. That's why it's all stick figures. But it goes into more than just the visual appearance. It goes into the humor and the writing. There's just a unique style and flow to it that only a kid could really come up with. Most of the episodes I think are about movie parodies, which is all fine and good, but the episode I'm recommending is not quite that. In this episode, a dog is having too many puppies and
we're getting them fixed today.
Fixed?
All of this comes together for a very unique combination of an episode, to say the least. The Replacements. Todd Strikes Out. Todd and Riley were oh so sad until they discovered a Flea & Co. ad. Then they're given a cell phone that allows them to replace anyone in their life. They use this to get a daredevil father and a secret agent mom with a talking British car. The premise of the show is completely ridiculous, but the show itself really does make the most of it. You got a lot of people in weird scenarios making weird decisions, and I do think that's enough for the series to run on. Or I do now that the show has actually proved to me that this could work. In this particular episode, the kids have a coach who doesn't seem to be taking winning all that seriously. So Todd decides to replace him with a professional baseball player. And watching a pro try to take a group of grade schoolers to the big leagues, there is just so much comedy there. Duckman, America the Beautiful. All of the adult cartoons today that focus on sitcom or satire owe a lot to Duckman. This show was super important for the development of animation, but today it seems to be completely forgotten. It stars Duckman, this rotten sleaze that's supposed to be both a private investigator and a family man. And he isn't too good at either of them. This episode is a missing persons case. The missing woman? America. And so Duckman is forced to go throughout history and figure out where the hell she's been, through the 50s, the 60s, the 80s, all the way up to the today of the 90s. In 2024, this episode is a very unique watch, and I do think this is a good example of the kind of show you're getting into, even if the characters act a little weird to fit the satire.
It appears they don't allow people of color in this community.
Johnny Bravo, the sensitive male. Johnny Bravo sounds like one of those shows that have aged terribly. Like one of the first on the cancellation block. It's just like Pepe Le Pew, right? No, actually. The show has aged quite gracefully. It is about Johnny trying to hit on women and then get laid. That much is true, yeah. There are plenty of episodes not about that, but it is a good chunk of them. However, Johnny doesn't really win in the end, though. Most of the show is this oaf getting his block knocked in. And if you don't believe me about this show aging actually pretty well, there's this episode, The Sensitive Male, where Johnny comes across a Schoolhouse Rock teacher who tries to give Johnny all kinds of advice.
Well, you know, Johnny, you've got to act polite, thoughtful, and considerate. But no one ever said you gotta mean it.
About sleazy, dishonest ways to get women, and pays for it. The show has aged better than Time Squad, I'll say that much. But that's a topic for another day. Phantom Investigators, Haunted Dreams. If you're a diehard fan of Life with Loopy like I am, then this certainly looks familiar. This is what that same team did afterwards, up to and using a lot of the same props. It's also got a lot of the same style that you can expect, although this one is much more high concept and story driven. Phantom Investigators is about psychic kids hunting down ghosts. Do I really have to say anything more to sell this show? All of the episodes are currently officially on YouTube, and it's criminal that they have less than 10k views each. The characters are great, the humor is fun, and the stories are engaging. This particular episode is about a girl who is haunted by ghosts every time that she falls asleep. There's this closed down roller coaster, some drama with one of the members considering quitting. I love this little thing, and it really deserves a larger fan base. The Baskervilles, No Place Like Home. Here's a deep cut, and no, it has nothing to do with Sir Conan Doyle. This show stars a completely normal family, an oblivious mom and dad, a polite teenage son, and a hellraiser of a daughter. They get the opportunity to move to hell, or a theme park based on hell, depending on your localization. It was advertised as a reverse of the Munsters, and it's just a fantastic concept. I found myself really getting into it. Unfortunately, the series has never had a proper home release, so you'll have to find the episodes on YouTube at present. And even more unfortunately, you can't find them all, as the show is considered partially lost. And it's a crying shame because this is really good. See it before the rest of it disappears. And to end this project, we'll bring up the most recent episode, the pilot of Ellis Mark's Catching Up. This is an indie animation that's been getting a lot of buzz lately, and for good reason. It's quite a charming production, with the kind of humor that you'd expect out of Ellis Mark's writing. It comes across as very relatable, especially if you're any kind of introvert. Not to mention, there's a ton of cameos from people that you probably know from something or another. It's quite impressive that all of this was able to be pulled off in just 2 years of work. And as this video goes up, there is a Kickstarter that should be going on until the end of October. If you'd like to make a direct impact, I'll leave the link in the description of this video, but if not, I recommend at least giving the episode a watch. It is brimming with effort, and you won't be disappointed. And that is 100 cartoon and cartoon episode recommendations. I was focusing more on not exactly the best episodes of these shows, but the best episodes to introduce people to these new shows. Do you like my choices? Or do you think there was a better episode that could be used to introduce people to something like Super Robot Monkey Force Hyper Team Go, Kid vs. Cat, or Invader Zim? I also do know there were a bunch of great shows that just missed making this list. Bob's Burgers, Ben 10, Code Lyoko, Mucha Lucha. I'm looking more into those, but I had to cut it somewhere. Let me know about shows that I should talk about in the future, because if this video does well enough, I will certainly make a follow-up. And while you're at it, tell me which one of these selections interests you the most, if you'd like to see maybe a full video on any of these shows. And because I do want you to actually watch these shows, I have put a resource in the description to tell you exactly where you can find each of them. As streaming services are a cluster truck right now, I'll update it when I can. But I'm sure that in theory, there could be a place that has all of these cartoons at once. You know, in theory, that I don't endorse in any way whatsoever. In a completely unrelated statement, piracy is a service problem and not a price problem, and if companies don't make their old shows accessible to new audiences, they're going to get pirates. Not that I endorse piracy. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all soon.